He was known as a man of wealth, a person who had everything that money could buy: expensive cars, a grand house, and a circle of friends who admired him not for who he was, but for what he had. People often said he carried himself like the world belonged to him, and perhaps in his mind, it did. But behind all that charm and luxury, there was also arrogance. He thought money could fix anything, and pride had made him blind to what truly mattered in life. One evening, as he sat with his group of friends in a fancy restaurant, the talk turned into a game of boasting. Each one wanted to prove who was more powerful, who could do something outrageous just to show they had no limits. That's when a cruel idea formed in his mind. With a half smile, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I could marry anyone I want, even someone society doesn't see as beautiful, just to prove it's all about wealth. She wouldn't say no. Who would refuse me?" His friends laughed loudly, clinking their glasses. Some cheered him on, while others looked at him in surprise. "Would you really do that?" one of them asked. His pride didn't let him back down. "Of course," he said, confident and smug. And just like that, what began as a careless statement became a bet that would change his life in ways he never expected. Not far from his world of wealth lived a woman who knew nothing of these games. She lived a simple life, working in a small bakery where the smell of fresh bread and cakes filled the air every morning. She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads with glamour, but she carried herself with warmth and kindness. People who came to the bakery often left with not just bread, but also with a smile, because she had a way of making everyone feel seen and valued. She never imagined that her path would cross with his. To her, rich men belonged in another world, one filled with things she could never dream of. But life sometimes writes stories we can't predict. A few days after that night with his friends, he walked into the bakery. Dressed in his crisp suit and polished shoes, he looked out of place among the shelves of pastries. The woman behind the counter greeted him the same way she greeted everyone else, with a smile. "Good morning. What would you like today?" she asked gently. He didn't come there for bread or cake. He came with a plan, though he hid it behind a polite smile. They spoke briefly, and he found her simple nature amusing. Over the next week, he returned again and again, pretending to be interested in her, asking her about her life, and showing what seemed like kindness. She had no reason to doubt him. Why would she? When someone listens to your stories, looks into your eyes, and acts as if you matter, it's easy to believe it's genuine. Her friends at the bakery noticed his visits. They whispered among themselves, wondering why a man like him kept coming back. Some told her it was unusual, but she brushed it off, saying, maybe he just likes the bread. Deep down, though, she felt a spark of hope. Could it be that someone had finally seen her, not as just another face in the crowd, but as someone worth noticing? Then, one evening, as the bakery was closing, he surprised her. He walked up with flowers in his hand and, with a smile that seemed so sincere, he asked, "Will you marry me?" The words stunned her. She stood frozen, unsure if she had heard him right. Marriage, her heart raced, and her hands trembled. She had never thought someone like him would even look her way, let alone ask her something so serious. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me?" He gave her a practiced smile and said, "Because you are different. Because you are kind. I want someone real in my life." His voice carried just the right mix of charm and warmth to convince her that his words were true. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of shock. All her life, she had been told she wasn't enough, too plain, too ordinary, too unlike the women who graced magazines or movie screens. And here was a man who had everything, saying he wanted her. She didn't know it was part of a cruel bet. She only saw hope, a chance at love she thought might never come. That night, she said yes. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a lifetime of longing. She believed her life was about to change for the better. What she didn't know was that behind his polished smile, this was not a love story he intended to honor. For him, it was still a joke, a game to prove to his friends that he could do anything. But life has its own way of teaching lessons. And soon, the man who thought he had it all would learn that real worth is not measured by money or pride, but by the heart. And the woman he thought would be part of a joke was about to become the greatest lesson of his life. The wedding day arrived faster than anyone expected. For her, It felt like a dream she was still trying to believe. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her simple gown, her hands trembling as she touched the lace. It wasn't the kind of dress from glossy magazines, but to her it was beautiful. She had never imagined herself as a bride, yet here she was, ready to marry a man everyone else said was far beyond her reach. Her friends from the bakery gathered around her, whispering words of encouragement. They reminded her that she deserved happiness, even though some of them secretly wondered why such a rich man had chosen her. She ignored the doubts. Love doesn't always follow logic, she told herself. Maybe life had finally given her something good. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the groom was getting ready in a luxurious suite. His friends surrounded him, laughing and joking. They weren't there to celebrate love, they were there to witness a show. Some of them even placed bets on how long the marriage would last. To them, this wasn't a wedding, it was entertainment. When he put on his tailored suit and looked at himself in the mirror, he felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Pride, because he thought he was proving his power to his friends. Unease, because a small voice in his mind questioned why he was doing this. But instead of listening, he drowned that voice with laughter and champagne. The ceremony was held in a grand hall decorated with flowers, crystal chandeliers, and golden chairs. Guests in designer clothes filled the space, their eyes curious and judgmental. They whispered among themselves the moment the bride walked in. She wasn't the kind of woman they expected to see walking down that aisle. Some even laughed quietly, hiding their smiles behind their glasses of wine. She noticed the stares. She felt the weight of their judgment with every step she took. But when she looked ahead and saw him standing there, smiling as if he meant it, her heart steadied. She reminded herself that this was her moment. Maybe people wouldn't understand, but love didn't need their approval. The vows were exchanged. Rings were placed, and when he leaned in to kiss her, flashes from cameras lit up the room. On the outside, it looked like a fairy tale and unusual but heartwarming match. On the inside, though, the truth was darker. For him, the kiss was an act. For her, it was the beginning of forever. At the reception, the differences between their worlds became clearer. She sat at the decorated table, feeling out of place among the wealthy guests. They spoke of business trips, expensive vacations, and luxury brands she had never heard of. She smiled politely, trying to fit in, but deep down she felt small. Still, she clung to the hope that in time, she would be accepted. He, on the other hand, played the role of the charming husband. He held her hand, introduced her proudly, and even whispered sweet words into her ear for others to hear. His friends watched with amusement, nudging each other and laughing quietly. They thought it was hilarious, this rich man marrying a woman who didn't belong in their world. But something unexpected began to happen that night. As the hours passed, he started noticing little things about her. How she thanked every waiter who brought food to the table. How she noticed when one of the servers dropped a glass and went over to help clean it, even though she was the bride. How she laughed genuinely when someone told a joke, without trying to impress anyone. There was something real about her, something he couldn't fake even if he tried. And though he didn't admit it to himself, a tiny part of him felt moved. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the hall was quiet, she sat beside him, her gown slightly wrinkled, her hair falling loose from hours of celebration. She looked at him with soft eyes and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me. I don't know why you did, but I promise I'll do my best to make you happy." Her words struck him like a blade. He forced a smile, but inside, he felt a flicker of guilt. She didn't know the truth that she was part of a cruel game. Her gratitude and sincerity were more than he deserved. For the first time, the joke didn't feel so funny. As they left the hall and drove away into the night, she leaned her head on his shoulder. Her eyes closed in quiet happiness. He stared out of the window, his mind restless. The bet had seemed like entertainment at first, but now, sitting beside a woman who believed in him with all her heart, he wondered if he had gone too far. That night marked the beginning of their married life. For her, it was filled with hope. For him, it was the start of a silent battle between his pride and the guilt slowly growing inside him. Married life began in a house that looked more like a palace than a home. Tall glass windows, sparkling chandeliers, Endless rooms filled with art and furniture that most people only saw in magazines. It was overwhelming. When she first stepped inside, she froze in awe. She had grown up in a small, cozy house where the kitchen was the warmest spot. Now she stood in a world that didn't feel like hers. At first, she tiptoed around the house, careful not to touch anything. But soon, her natural warmth began to shine through. She spoke kindly to the staff, remembered their names, and even joined them in the kitchen, laughing as she learned recipes she had never tried before. Her presence slowly began to soften the heavy silence that usually hung in those grand halls. He noticed it too. At first, he brushed it off, but over time, he couldn't ignore how the staff, who usually kept their distance, now smiled more, laughed more, and seemed happier when she was around. She didn't treat them as workers. She treated them as people, something he had never thought to do. Meanwhile, his friends kept their distance, but didn't stop mocking. When they visited, they whispered sly comments and smirked behind her back. They would say things like, "You really did it, huh? Never thought I'd see the day," or, "Bet you'll get bored soon." Their words were sharp, and though she pretended not to notice, a part of her heart felt the sting. Still, she carried herself with grace. She focused on making the house a home. She placed flowers on the dining table, cooked meals with her own hands, and sat with him in the evenings, asking about his day. Her kindness wasn't forced, it was who she was. He, on the other hand, struggled inside. The bet still lingered like a shadow. Every time he looked at her, he remembered the cruel laughter of his friends and the prideful smirk he had worn when he proposed. But something had changed. She wasn't what he expected. She wasn't desperate for his money or attention. She wasn't trying to climb into his world. She was simply living, giving, and loving in her quiet way. One rainy evening, as they sat near the fireplace, she handed him a cup of tea she had made herself. "I don't know if you even like it this way," she said softly, "but it's how my mother used to make it." He took a sip, and for a moment, he was speechless. It wasn't about the tea. It was about the memory she shared so openly, something so personal, something real. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw more than just the woman from the bakery. He saw a heart so pure it unsettled him. Days turned into weeks, and his mask began to crack. When his friends called, he no longer laughed at their jokes about her. When they mocked her, he changed the subject. He even started spending less time with them, preferring the quiet evenings at home where she would tell him stories about her childhood, her dreams, and the little things that made her smile. One afternoon, he came home earlier than usual and found her in the garden. She was kneeling in the dirt, planting flowers with her hands covered in soil. She looked up, her face glowing with the kind of joy that money couldn't buy. "I thought this place needed a bit of color," she said, laughing at the mess she had made. For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened. In that moment, he felt something shift inside him. The bet, the arrogance, the pride, it all seemed so shallow compared to the quiet beauty of what he was witnessing. She wasn't part of a game anymore. She was real, and her presence was beginning to change him in ways he never imagined. But the past has a way of catching up. His friends weren't done with their cruel jokes. One evening, they came over uninvited, filling the living room with their loud voices and mocking laughter. She served them tea with a smile, not realizing they were laughing at her, not with her. He watched her walk back into the kitchen, still carrying herself with grace, and something inside him snapped. For the first time, he felt ashamed not of her, but of himself. As the night went on, he found himself unable to laugh at their cruel remarks. Instead, he stood up abruptly and said, "Enough. She's my wife. Show some respect." The room fell silent. His friends stared at him, surprised. He had never spoken to them like that before. Later, when the guests left, she asked him quietly, "Why did you say that?" He looked at her, guilt heavy in his eyes. He wanted to tell her everything, the truth about the bet, the shame he carried, but the words wouldn't come, not yet. Instead, he just said, "Because you deserve it." That night, as she fell asleep beside him, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he realized he was no longer the same man who had made that cruel bet. Something in him was changing, and it was because of her. What began as a joke was starting to feel like the most serious thing he had ever done. It was an ordinary afternoon when everything changed. She had gone to the market to pick up some fresh vegetables, something she enjoyed doing herself rather than sending the staff. She liked talking to the sellers, asking about their families, and choosing food with her own hands. When she returned home, smiling as she carried her bags, she didn't know that a storm was waiting inside. She walked into the living room and froze. His friends were there again, lounging on the couches with drinks in their hands, their laughter echoing against the walls. She was used to their presence, but what caught her attention this time was the way they were laughing too loud, too sharp. And then she heard it. One of them said, "I still can't believe you went through with it. Marrying her just to prove a point. You've outdone yourself." Her heart skipped. The words felt like a punch to her chest. She set the bags down slowly, her hands trembling. Another friend added, "Best bet you've ever made." And look at her, she doesn't even know. The room erupted in cruel laughter. She couldn't move. Her eyes darted to him. He was sitting there, his face pale, his jaw tight. For once, he didn't laugh with them. But his silence was worse than words. Silence confirmed the truth. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Is this true?" The laughter died instantly. The friends exchanged nervous glances, and all eyes turned to him. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence was enough. She felt her world collapse in that moment. The man she had trusted, the man she had believed had chosen her out of love, had done it all for a cruel game. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held her head high. Without saying another word, she turned and walked out of the room. Her steps were steady, but her heart was breaking with every move she made. He stood up, calling after her, "Wait please, listen." But she didn't stop. She went upstairs, packed a small bag, and walked past him without looking at his face. "Don't go," he pleaded, his voice shaking now. The arrogant tone was gone, replaced by desperation. "It's not what it looks like." She stopped at the door, finally meeting his eyes. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deep. "It's exactly what it looks like. You turned me into a joke, and I was foolish enough to believe it was love with that." She left. For the first time in years, his house felt truly empty. The laughter of his friends no longer entertained him. Their presence felt toxic, unbearable. He threw them out that very night, slamming the door behind them. But the silence that followed was worse. Days passed, and he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He sat alone in the same grand living room where the truth had spilled out, haunted by her face, her words. Every corner of the house reminded him of her laughter in the kitchen, her humming in the garden, her gentle way of making the staff feel like family. The same man who once believed he could buy anything now realized he had lost the only thing that truly mattered, and money couldn't bring it back. Meanwhile, she returned to her old life, the small bakery that had always been her safe place. People noticed her silence, the heaviness in her eyes. When customers asked if she was okay, she smiled politely, but inside, she was broken. She replayed every moment of their marriage in her mind, his proposal, his words, the way he looked at her, and now she wondered if any of it had been real. Yet, despite the pain, she didn't crumble. She went back to her routine, kneading dough, serving bread, greeting customers with kindness. Life had taught her many lessons, and this was another one. She refused to let bitterness consume her. She had been fooled, yes, but she still had her dignity. Back in his mansion, he began changing in ways even he didn't understand. He stopped going to parties, stopped meeting those so-called friends. He donated large sums of money quietly, but even that felt empty. Charity couldn't erase guilt. The truth was, he didn't want to be the man he used to be anymore. One evening, he found himself standing outside the bakery. He hadn't planned it. His car seemed to take him there on its own. Through the glass, he saw her behind the counter, smiling faintly at a customer. She looked tired, but there was still that glow about her, that warmth that had drawn him in from the very beginning. He didn't go inside. He stood there, watching, realizing how much he had destroyed. He knew words wouldn't be enough. Apologies wouldn't fix the wound he had created. If he wanted her forgiveness, he would have to change completely, not for her, but for himself. That night, as he drove away, He whispered to himself, "She deserves better. I have to be better." And for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about money, power, or pride. He was thinking about love, the kind he never truly understood until it was too late. Weeks turned into months, yet the emptiness inside him only grew. The mansion, once filled with noise and visitors, now felt like a cage. The silence echoed louder than any laughter ever had. He spent his nights staring at the ceiling, haunted by the look in her eyes when she walked away. He tried everything to bury his guilt. He donated to charities, sponsored schools, and built shelters. People praised him for his generosity, but their words meant nothing. He didn't care about applause. He only wanted one thing, her forgiveness. But forgiveness was not something that could be bought. He knew that now. One morning, he stood in front of the bakery again. This time, he walked inside. She was there behind the counter, her hands dusted with flour, her hair tied back. She looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. He saw surprise in her gaze, but also pain. What are you doing here?" she asked softly. He swallowed hard, his voice unsteady. "I came to say sorry." The words hung in the air. Simple, yet heavy. She looked at him, waiting. For once, he didn't hide behind charm or arrogance. His voice cracked as he continued. "I was wrong. I was cruel. I treated your life, your love, as a game. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I had to tell you the truth that I am ashamed of the man I was." Her eyes filled with tears, but she stayed quiet. She had heard apologies before in her life, but this one was different. Not because of the words, but because of the brokenness in his voice. "I'm not asking you to come back," he added quickly. "I know I've lost that chance, but I promise you, I am not the same man anymore. I will spend the rest of my life proving that whether you forgive me or not." With that, he placed an envelope on the counter and walked out. She opened it later, expecting to see money. Instead, she found a letter. In it, he wrote about how he had ended ties with his old friends, how he had sold his luxury cars, and how he was using his wealth to support people who had nothing. Not to look good, but because for the first time, he understood what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. Days passed. She thought about his words, his letter. She didn't trust easily anymore, but she couldn't ignore the fact that something in him had truly changed. People in town began whispering about the rich man, who now spent his days working quietly at shelters, serving food with his own hands. The arrogance was gone. The pride had melted away. One evening, she closed the bakery and found him waiting outside. He wasn't in his expensive suit. He wore simple clothes, his hair a little messy, his eyes tired but softer than before. "I'm not here to disturb you," he said gently. "I just wanted to ask, can I walk you home?" She hesitated, then nodded. They walked in silence, the street lamps casting warm light on the road. For the first time, there was no act between them. Just two people, side by side. At her doorstep, he stopped. "I don't know if I'll ever earn your forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I will never stop trying." She looked at him for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something you prove you deserve." He nodded. "Then I'll prove it," and he did. Over the next months, he kept showing up, not with gifts, not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent actions. He helped at the bakery when it was busy. He listened when she spoke. He treated her not as a prize, but as a person. Slowly, her walls began to crumble. One day, as they worked side by side in the bakery, she handed him a loaf of bread and said softly, "People can change, but only if they truly want to." "I think you do." He looked at her, his eyes filling with gratitude. "I do," he whispered. And in that quiet bakery, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the warmth of something real, she finally let go of the anger. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it opened the door to a future that could be different. Their story, which began as a cruel joke, ended as a lesson to everyone who had laughed. Love is not about appearances or wealth. It is about respect, kindness, and the courage to change. He had lost everything when she walked away, but in learning how to value her heart, he found the one thing money could never buy: redemption. And that shocked everyone the most.